The Nintendo Switch is the most revolutionary console released in the last 17 years, and in this video I'm going to tell you why. I know it's 6 years old and in theory something should have sort of overtaken it, but Nintendo are genius. When people talk about the console wars, they normally talk about PlayStation and Xbox, and then Nintendo sort of just sneaks in there without anyone noticing. But here's the thing, in the first 29 months of sales worldwide, Nintendo Switch sales are ahead of the PS5 and the Xbox Series X and S. Even now, 6 years later, they are still incredibly popular. They're great for adults, they're great for teenagers, kids, grandparents, great for single player play, and are revolutionary for multiplayer. In this video, I'm going to talk about the Switch OLED that I bought this year and why it should still have its place in your living room. Not my Switch in your living room, your own one. So for those people who have been sort of asleep for the last 6 years, what is the Nintendo Switch? Well, let's very quickly catch you up on that. The Nintendo Switch was originally released in 2017, and it offers a pretty unique concept. It is a home console that is also a handheld console, and it's also a separate portable display and console that you can take and have remotes separate to it. It's completely different, honestly. You can play this with a TV and dock mode, or you can quickly take it out and move into handheld mode, or use the kickstand and have the controllers separate. And this is made possible by the controllers being able to completely detach from the display. What is also great is these Joy-Cons can be used together with the display. They can be used in the included mount, and they can be used completely separately to double up the amount of controllers that you have. And not only can they just be used as normal controllers for a console, they can also be used like a Wii remote. This is the most versatile console that's ever been released. Now, what are the options of Nintendo Switch that are available to you? Well, excluding all of the limited editions that have been released over the last 6 years, you actually have 3 options. There is the Switch OLED, which is the most recent model, and that's the one that I am having here with me today. There is the original OG Nintendo Switch, and there is the Switch Lite. Now, I have used and played on all of these Nintendo Switches throughout the last 6 years, whether they be other people's or my own. I've owned 2. I had a Nintendo Switch Lite, which I will get onto later in the video as to why I now have this one, and then obviously the one that you see next to me just now. When it comes to processing and graphical ability, they are all exactly the same. The Switch Lite is the cheapest, but it does just limit you to handheld mode, which sort of kills all of the local multiplayer options that you get. There aren't any removable Joy-Cons, and they make playing Nintendo Switch games possible, but not how they are intended. Now, the OLED is almost exactly the same as the original, bar a few minor sort of quality of life upgrades. On the new OLED model, the display is, you guessed it, OLED. They've reduced the bezel so the display is bigger, it's brighter, and it has amazing contrast, completely deep blacks, exactly what you'd expect from an OLED display. The dock that you put it in to connect it to your TV contains an Ethernet port, which isn't on the original. That means if you have poor Wi-Fi in the place where you want to have your Switch, it might be worth going for the OLED so you can plug it in hardwired. And the thing that, weirdly to me, is the most important upgrade is the kickstand at the back is bigger. It's the entire width of the device, whereas on the original, it was this little tiny thing off to one side, which wasn't the most stable. Also, this bigger kickstand is fully adjustable, so you can have it completely upright as I have here, or you can lay it back further and further and further to sort of change the angle depending on how you're playing. Now, all the Joy-Cons work with both the original and the OLED model. The actual devices are exactly the same size, it's just the display is bigger and the bezels are smaller, but other than that, they're exactly the same. And you can get separate Joy-Cons that you can buy separately in order to increase the amount of Joy-Cons from 2 to 4, and then you can play 4-player or however many. You can get more Joy-Cons again if you want, if you're going to have them charging and stuff like that. Personal preference. You can also buy a Pro controller and other wired controllers to connect to your Switch. The speakers on the Switch, on all the models, aren't particularly fantastic. They're okay for a portable device, exactly what you'd expect from any sort of portable device over the last, sort of 20 years. Nothing revolutionary. Apparently the OLED is meant to be the best speaker in the range, but I noticed negligible difference between this and the other models. It's going to be sort of tinny. If you want a really good sound experience on the Switch, you're either going to want to play it docked into your TV and use your sound system for your TV, or you're going to want to wear headphones, which is probably going to give you the best sound. Now, there is on the Switch console an auxiliary port directly on the top, so if you want to connect a pair of wired headphones, you can do so just like that. Now, in terms of the overall feel of the Nintendo Switch, the OLED and the non-OLED are pretty similar in terms of weight. I think the OLED is ever so slightly heavier, but they do feel pretty good in the hand. Compared to the Nintendo Switch Lite, which is obviously all one shape, that feels a bit more stable, whereas this one you can tell where the Joy-Cons are sort of attached. There's a little bit of wobble. You wouldn't want to be sort of whacking them too hard, and just in case the Joy-Cons would break off. I don't think it's going to do it that easily though. I think if you have kids and they drop it, they're probably going to be fine, but it doesn't feel incredibly sturdy. That being said, this particular model does feel nicer than the original model, especially with the kickstand. That just feels a lot stronger and a lot more stable than the tiny flimsy little stand. Now, the thing that Nintendo Switch struggles with the most isn't really that important when it comes to gaming on the Nintendo Switch. And that thing it struggles with is the graphical performance. This thing is massively outdated when it comes to comparing it to console juggernauts like the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. It's actually negligibly worse than the generation before as well. I mean, bearing in mind this was released as a handheld console whilst the PS4 and the Xbox One was out, so you do have to bear that in mind when you're comparing this graphically. And as they've updated it, they've not actually increased the processing power either, which is questionable. That being said, you still do get AAA released games on this thing, and they can perform nowhere near as nicely and look as anywhere near as good as that they would perform on PS5 or an Xbox Series X, but you can still get the games with the gameplay and the storylines. So it's worth noting. Massive library as well with the Nintendo Switch. The real winners with the Nintendo Switch though are the Nintendo exclusives. Other than past Nintendo consoles, the Switch is the only place where you're going to be getting Mario games, Kirby, Legend of Zelda, Super Smash Brothers. People go on about all the time about how good Sony and PlayStation's exclusives are. And as much as I do agree that they are fantastic games and those AAA games are fantastic, you cannot argue that the king of exclusivity when it comes to gaming is Nintendo. And there are a ton of Nintendo games that are great for all ages. Pokemon. No further words needed. I've been playing Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and that is a fantastic game. And what Nintendo do amazingly well is they take this device, which is massively underpowered, and they design games around it that don't need to be these juggernaut super realistic games, but they're still amazing looking and beautiful. You've got Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom on the Nintendo Switch are absolutely beautiful open world games that play in this really nostalgic retro way and have this amazingly simple yet beautiful design that you just don't get on AAA games. AAA games nowadays are ultra realistic and they look fantastic, don't get me wrong, but Nintendo seem to find a way of not having to do that with their exclusive games, and it's massively impressive if you ask me. Now, my kids love Mario Kart. Ever since the Mario movie came out, all things Mario is just really exciting to them, so we've played a couple of different Mario games on the Switch, one of those being Mario Kart, the other one being Super Mario Bros. U Deluxe. And as much as my kids are quite young and they don't quite get the hang of the games as well as so kids that are slightly older, there are actually tons of assist features on these games like Mario Kart that allows them to play and not get massively frustrated with the fact that they just can't play games as well as me and my wife. There are features that make the steering be assisted for them so that they don't constantly fall off the edge on Rainbow Road, and that automatically accelerates. My son, who's only 3, having to hold his finger on the accelerate button the entire time and not accidentally hold the wrong button is actually a problem, but he can play Mario Kart with his sister. I mean, they still come 11th and 12th pretty much exclusively all the time, but they can play and they can use the items and they have a fun time, so you can't really argue with that. Now, speaking about games being beautiful on the Nintendo Switch, let's talk a little bit about how the sort of resolution and stuff like that work. On the Nintendo Switch console itself, the resolution is 720p, and that's across all the devices. So for the smaller display, it's just ever so slightly sharper, and then the OLED, you could say, isn't as sharp. I wouldn't notice it. The difference in size doesn't make that much difference on the pixel per inch sort of ratio. 720p is perfectly fine for the handheld devices, and they don't need anything more than that. The problem is that if you were to plug that into a TV, 720p looks a bit jarring, and that does happen when you go on the main menu. It displays on your TV in 720p and it looks awful. When you actually start a game, it does then go to 1080p. So it's not as bad. There's no 4K gaming on this, which, I mean, you can't really argue with, bearing in mind it is a handheld console. And obviously most of the games aren't designed to be that graphically impressive that 4K would actually make any sense anyway. Third-party games on the Switch are plentiful, and they range in quality greatly. You do have some AAA games that are obviously scaled back, like FIFA or The Witcher. And there are some games on there that are literally just mobile games that you would get on your iPhone that have been ported to the Nintendo Switch. So, I mean, that's good and bad. They're cheap. They're much cheaper than the Nintendo exclusives, but it is something there to bear in mind. But it just comes back to that point. The Switch isn't trying to be a graphical masterhouse for these amazing AAA games. It's trying to do gaming in a completely different way. It's trying to be gaming wherever you are, whether you're at home in your living room, in the kitchen, on a plane, in the car. The Nintendo Switch just wants to have enough power to bring games to people in those different ways, and it does it amazingly well. So let's talk about that. How do I use my Nintendo Switch? It's almost like asking how you have your eggs. Do you have them scrambled? Do you have them fried? Do you poach them? Do you have it all of those ways at different times? Do I play in the living room on my own? Or do my kids play in the car and then play multiplayer together? Do we take it to a friend's house, or do I just play in bed? You can play anywhere, and I love that. I've played Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, which I'm still sort of going through, and I will get to Tears of the Kingdom, but I'm gonna finish this one first. Now, playing that big screen is fantastic, but then if my wife wants to watch something on the TV, I just take the console and I can play handheld. Happy days. And that's clearly something that is a massive selling point for a lot of people, because that's the entire premise of PlayStation's new PlayStation Portal, which is selling out everywhere. So clearly that's something that people love, and Nintendo were the ones to revolutionize that. Now, for reasons that I won't get into, me and my wife were in hospital over the sort of last weekend, and that's somewhere where it's sort of not great. There's a lot of waiting around, especially if you don't feel good. And we could take the Nintendo Switch and play games and have a laugh together in that sort of not particularly fun environment, a bit dreary, but we sort of brought that into there so we could sort of be silly and have fun and pass the time in that way. Now, as my kids get a bit older, I will expect them to sort of take the Switch out more into the car and stuff like that. Not that I'll say that all the time, but if we're going on a long trip, that will make a bit more sense. If we go on holiday, being able to take it with us and still use the Switch and game together as a family, even though we don't have the TV there, that's going to be a great option for us. And I love that with such little fuss, our kids could be playing a game together, multiplayer or single player, and then any of the family can just sort of join in. They can grab a Joy-Con and we can play multiplayer, and it's really easy and fuss-free. One of the things I love is the fact that you can just take a Joy-Con out and you just basically start any game, and you can configure how you're using the Joy-Cons just by pressing two buttons. And that works in loads of ways. One person could be using one Joy-Con and another person could be using two together in a remote like that, and it just works. It's so clever and so sort of seamless how you can sort of transition between them. It's really, really easy. And when you are constantly changing the layout of how you use the controllers, the Switch makes it super easy, because instead of using the letters that are on the buttons, it just shows you the layout. So it says the button over to the right is to do this, and the button over to the left is to do this, and it just makes everything so much easier. Obviously, local multiplayer is the main selling point of the Nintendo Switch, I would say, other than the particular Nintendo exclusives. I mean, it's the only console that you can buy that gives you a way of using it with two controllers straight out of the box without having to buy a second controller. But the Switch also has multiplayer functionality over the internet as well. So you can play either wirelessly with someone else with a Switch with you, or you can play over the internet with someone in a place completely far away, with grandma, or I don't know how many grandmas have a Nintendo Switch, honestly, but with friends in other places, you can do online play that way. Now, if you do want online play, you have to do that in the same way you do with a PlayStation or Xbox, and you have to pay a subscription fee to be able to utilize that feature. With Nintendo, they do offer some sort of freebies and benefits if you do that, and you can upgrade to get extras as well. You can get expansion packs for games that are included in those sort of subscriptions as well. Online multiplayer can be a bit more kid-friendly as well compared to other platforms. There isn't really any way to do online chat using just the Switch. On games like Mario Kart, you can play online with people and you're not going to be worrying about people swearing at your kids and stuff like that. If you play Fortnite and other games that have their own built-in chat rooms and stuff like that, you can't avoid that. But at least your kids aren't going to be playing Mario Kart and have someone calling them a Yahoo! Do you know what I mean? Now, which Switch is for me? It is a really important question because you can make a mistake, and honestly, I did exactly that. Me and my wife, when the Nintendo Switch Lite came out, we bought one because we hadn't had a Nintendo Switch before that moment. We wanted to sort of make use of the games. We thought it would be a fun thing. We heard that they were great. So we thought, oh, that's a great way of getting into it, and it's cheaper, so it's saving us a bit of money. We can still play the same games. And then we got the Nintendo Switch Lite, and we realised that the reason why the Nintendo Switch is such a good thing to have is that it's great for multiplayer, and we just didn't have any of that functionality. We couldn't play together on the same console. Now, if you are single or you're on your own and you're going to be the only person using this console and you're not planning on doing it for any of the multiplayer games, you just want to play Pokemon and Zelda and those sort of single player experiences, the Nintendo Switch Lite is a perfectly valid choice for you. But you do lock yourself out of all of those other experiences. So if you at some point decide to change your mind, you're going to have to buy a different console. So by spending a little bit more and getting the normal Nintendo Switch, the original or the OLED, you're going to open yourself up to a lot more experiences and functionality that you just wouldn't have done in the first place. The next question is do you get the original one or do you get the OLED like I've got just here? And honestly, functionality wise, you're not going to get anything extra from getting the OLED other than a few quality of life things that I went over earlier in the video. But as I speak at the moment, the price difference isn't that great. You're only going to pay an extra sort of £50 for the OLED model, or $50, or however much it is in your place. You can check the live prices on the links below. So personally for me, I would go for the OLED because those quality of life upgrades are actually nice. But if you're just going to be using this on a TV in a docked mode, you're not going to notice those. So if you're only using the Switch in one particular way, just get the OG original Switch. If you're going to be using it handheld, or you're going to be using it with the kickstand, it is definitely worth upgrading and going for the OLED model because you're going to get the nicer screen, a bigger screen. If you're sharing it with multiple people, having a bigger screen makes a big difference. And again, if you're sharing that screen on a table or out in the park somewhere, having something that's a little bit more stable on the back and a little bit more adjustable is going to make a huge difference to you. I would really like to know, do you have a Nintendo Switch? Let me know in the comments. Are you planning on getting one? Which model would you go for if you were to buy one today? The other thing to discuss are accessories. Do you get a case, extra Joy-Cons, different remote controls? I can go into that, and I will go into that in another video. So guys, join the community. We talk about all things gaming and tech and all of that stuff. So subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one. Woo!